I figured I should finally get off my ass and actually review this album before it falls behind in my schedule like that Gorillaz album. R.I.P.
I was thin and I saw life in you.
Fleet Foxes are a folk band that have found massive favour with yours truly in the past, as well as many others too. From the awe-inspiring Sun Giant EP to the feel-good self-titled debut that sparked out some of the band's most infamous songs like White Winter Hymnal,
I was following the pack, all swallowed in their coats, with scarves of red tied round their throats to keep their little heads.
with traditional folk instrumentation as well as Robin Pecknold's hair-raising vocal harmonies. Fleet Foxes stood out as an indie and contemporary folk act that would continue to wow the crowd if along the road they would increase their scope and get more ambitious, experimental possibly. And this paid off in spades for their 2011 release, or in my opinion, masterpiece, Helplessness Blues. Sorry, I couldn't help slipping my opinion in there, but Helplessness Blues didn't necessarily show the band changing their style necessarily, but they took what they had and they made it bigger. They gave their music such a grander scope, and they began to write music that sounded so overwhelmingly huge and as vast and as awe-inspiring as the natural world itself. The album dealt with that feeling of wanting to account for something bigger when you realize the world is so massive and you're just one tiny little splodge somewhere on it.
A functioning cog in some great machinery, serving something beyond me.
I could also ramble on about how Helplessness Blues is probably my favourite album of the decade so far, but that'd lead to me wasting more time not having even brought up with their new album here, Crack Up. It's a long overdue return from Fleet Foxes, their first album in about 6 years. But I wouldn't say the appeal of this new album would be easy to see for even the biggest admirers of the band like me, at least not upon initial listens. This album is so dense, it's so unorthodox, and it's actually quite progressive in its song structures and just the sounds that pop in here for even like a folk record. For Fleet Foxes, who have always been labelled as a band that doesn't necessarily change their sound that much, there's actually quite a significant change in the way that the band approaches their style of music. They haven't gone out of the box, but they've certainly tried a whole lot of different things. I think Fleet Foxes on this album tried to avoid some of the traditional song structures and the instant gratification that comes with them, especially when it comes to things like melody. There are still very satisfying melodies on this album, but they certainly don't pop in like immediately, or maybe on this record it takes more time for a crescendo to really build and get to the big moment, especially on that opening track. Crack Up is probably a little bit easier, I say that loosely, to appreciate if you wanted to hear Fleet Foxes be a bit more challenging, to be a bit more ambitious with their own sound, if you wanted them to diversify their sound a little bit more. They even enrich their instrumental palette, incorporating electronics and rock instrumentation, and even grandiose orchestral sections like on tracks such as 3rd of May.
If I lead you through the fury, will you call to me? And is all that I might owe you carved on ivory?
It builds and builds and builds this tension and a sense of adventure as it moves, but at the same time also shifts musical passages. On 3rd of May, we also see the band diving into a little bit of post-rock as well, as Pecknold pulls apart notions of fate and luck in the lyrics, reflecting on past memories, referencing the time that it all fell in line on the 3rd of May, which was the date that Helplessness Blues was released. The band's lyrics also become quite socially conscious too, although I reckon that they're actually more obtuse and not as easy to grasp the meaning of as they were on previous records. You actually kind of have to dig a little deeper into them, but still the storytelling aspect is there, like on Cassius, which literally does retell the story of the conspirators against Caesar, a notion of betrayal and mutiny. But I think my highlight lyrically is the track Fool's Errand, which does have a gorgeous chorus with Pecknold's signature vocal harmonies making their way back into the repertoire again. But lyrically it's quite a futile and even poignant track, where for once society seemed like it was heading in a good direction, progress could have been made, but it was all for naught in the end because it never got to that outcome. and it was a fool's errand to believe that it could have ever happened. And as for more musical moments that continue to stun, the swirling crescendo on the opening track, or the subdued but seriously spine-chilling I Should See Memphis, a song where the strings seep so smoothly and seductively like the sibilantic S sound that's snuck into this sentence, slick. Or the track Mearcstapa, in which many have noticed quite a possible Radiohead influence. It may be the more prominent bass line that sounds like it's on some kind of loop, reminiscent of a couple tracks off perhaps a moon-shaped pool, specifically Identikit or maybe Full Stop. Or I think maybe this influence was hinted at in the use of electronic sounds on this track. You can even hear sequenced drums partway through the song, but the way these layers of instrumentation build on one another is incredible, and I love the way the jazzy brass instruments, like all the trumpets, join in too. It's quite magical, all the chemistry that every part of the music has, even with that very classy acoustic cut. Crack Up is not Fleet Fox's most accessible album yet. It's definitely the most progressive and unorthodox, sometimes even very obtuse, lyrically and musically. Things do take time to grow, especially when it came to my listening on this album. I can't exactly say I found an immediate emotional punch from these songs, even though I loved the adventurous singles that dropped before its release, but I think as I came to it again and again, I just kind of loved the way that this album functions as one long musical piece with its many rollercoasterish highs and lows, and in my opinion those highs and lows are in terms of the richness of the instrumentation as opposed to the highs and lows in maybe like song quality, because I think that consistently this album is great. Even if this is the most experimental record yet, the beauty is no less gobsmacking. A very honest 8 out of 10. Yeah.